Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gio and Joey Show with my partner in crime. How you doing, Joey?
Better than I deserve.
Amen, brother. So, we have a shorter episode today, but nevertheless, it's going to be a good one. The video we are about to watch, I only watched the first 10 seconds because I know it's going to be a doozy. However, let the audience know what we're going to see and why you thought it'd be a good discussion tonight.
Yeah, so the perennial question that conservative Christians are asking these days is where does our faith place us in terms of politics? And B, how do we relate to others in society who have views and values and stuff that are different than ours? And there's different approaches. Michael Knowles is going to display one, and Gio and I are going to display another. And I think, personally, that ours is more in line with the American tradition, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, and obviously, I think it's going to be more aligned with biblical tradition as well and understanding what the scripture. And the premise of our show is that we are obviously Christians, but we are pro liberty of conscience. And we have to learn how to navigate that in a world that has different political views. Let's jump right into the video. I have it at 1.5 speed, so we can get through it pretty quickly, but I'm pretty sure most people can understand it still. Let's roll.
Parents are upset already. The lawsuits are being filed. They don't want the Ten Commandments in their kids' classroom. And here's what the governor of Louisiana has to say.
Or the children who may not believe in God and see this in their classroom, or parents who are upset that they may be in their child's classroom, what should they do?
Well, here's what I would say. I think we've forgotten in this country that democracy actually means majority rules. For some kind of way over the last 2 decades or so, for whatever reason, our government has flipped the script, or the people believe they flipped the script. When you elect people, you're elected by a majority. That majority gets to rule. That does not mean that if you don't like something, you have a right to impose that which the majority likes. And so what I would say to those parents is that if those posters in school and they find them so vulgar, tell the child not to look at it.
I love this. Jeff Landry, absolutely love this answer. Love that accent, too. My grandfather came from Baton Rouge. I love that Louisiana accent. He says, look, if for whatever reason you don't like the Ten Commandments, I think most people can agree. Ten Commandments, pretty good. You don't need to be the most Orthodox Christian or Jew. You could be agnostic or even atheist. You can agree with thou shalt not commit murder. Thou shalt not steal. But even if for whatever reason something's going really wrong in your life and you just really hate the Ten Commandments, you want to go home, worship Moloch, worship the devil or something, just tell your kid not to look at it. It's just one little poster in a classroom. Just don't look at it. And I love this answer, because this is the answer the libs give us when they upend every standard in norm and taboo in society. When they put up that rainbow flag in classrooms. They say, oh, if your kid doesn't like it, you don't have to look at it. Really, what they want you to do is pledge allegiance to it. Oh, that pride parade? What, you don't like it when a bunch of naked dudes are committing all sorts of obscene, disgusting sexual actions on a float going down Main Street in front of kids? Tell your kid not to look at it. Just don't look at it, man. You don't have to. No one's forcing you to look at it. Okay, well, now that's what we're saying about the Ten Commandments. No one's forcing you to look at it. But I think if you can have mile-long parades multiple times per year for weird, gross sex stuff in every major city and many small towns in America, I think we can have a little corner of a classroom for the Ten Commandments. Don't you think? Is that okay? Because, by the way, until recent decades, certainly until the middle of the 20th century, and even a little bit after that, we had this stuff all the time. We had the Bible taught in schools. We had prayer in schools until the liberals in the middle of the 20th century on the court decided to try to rewrite American law. If you want to talk about American history, sometimes the libs will try to invoke the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or the Great American Tradition. They should be very careful invoking the Great American Tradition, because in the Great American Tradition, your kids would be taught the Bible and they would be praying in schools. The Great American Tradition is blasphemy laws throughout the country. The Great American Tradition is blue laws in accordance with Christian tradition. Okay? The notion that we're some secular, downright atheistic country where religion has to be banished from the public square, that is a fantasy that was concocted after the Second World War. That is not real. Maybe perhaps it is real now because the libs have been so effective at imposing it. But this is basic stuff. And you have to ask yourself, if in a classroom where the charge is to teach, we have public education to teach kids, and teaching involves reading, writing, and arithmetic. Teaching involves dates and history and skills, music and art. And teaching also involves, most basically, ethics, good and bad, right and wrong. If we're no longer allowed to teach, thou shalt not commit murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, but we are allowed to teach, and we're actually forced to teach the ethics of the Pride movement. Pride, the queen of all vices, is a good thing. The deadliest of the seven deadly sins is a good thing. The Pride movement, which makes all sorts of claims about sexual behavior, which are contrary to morals. What political rights do we have? What good is public education? If public education at that point would simply exist to make your kid worse, to make your kid dumber and more wicked. and you wouldn't be allowed to teach him in public school how to be good and smart. So at that point, what's it good? Just get rid of it at that point. Who cares? This is the final test as far as I'm concerned. If you can't have a poster of the 10 Commandments in your classroom, okay, get rid of the classroom then, man. It is good for nothing. Now,
what were your initial thoughts when you read this? Because I'm actually more disappointed in Knowles than I am in the governor who replied initially, even though obviously I have issues with that as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, my first thing. Listen, so Knowles, obviously, his case is, listen, if we should be able to make this decision to, if we want to have the 10 Commandments in there, the left puts the pride flag and they disrespect parents' rights who disagree. We got to do the same thing. It's like, here's that. I actually think that for one thing, I think before we get to the morality of forcing people who disagree, it undermines our argument against the left, right? Because we're saying, hey, no, you're wrong to violate the conscience of conservative parents and Christian parents with the LGBT stuff. And I do think they're wrong to do that. And I think we should get that crap out of the schools. But then he's over here saying they're going to enforce theirs, so we're going to enforce ours. And it just becomes this endless tit for tat. Whereas if the Knowles gets his way, what are we going to have? We're going to have 25 states with just radically different and competing visions being forced upon the parents who disagree. So in California, conservatives, the argument is just going to be, conservatives, you're screwed and you got to have the gay stuff in school. And then in Louisiana, it's going to be liberal parents, you're screwed. You have to have faith things that you don't believe in taught to your kids. And I'm like, I just don't think that's a stable basis to rest society on.
Yeah, no doubt. And then he mentions that we are a Judeo-Christian society. And then before I get to the other things he said, but think about it. You're Protestant. I'm Protestant. Do we want a state that is putting Catholic stuff up? Because he's Catholic. That's the only reason I bring it up, right? Do you want statues of Mary and the saints and all that other stuff? If you wedge the door with the 10 Commandments, what else do you want to wedge in? Obviously, we're not for all this pride flag and all this stuff either, but there are proper ways to go about getting that out of the classrooms without, like you said, going this tick for tat. But then when he was talking about referencing the blasphemy laws and the blue laws and all that, like don't go back there because we can go back there and that's what it is. He almost seems enthusiastic to have those kind of laws. That clearly violates the separation of church and state, and it clearly violates the liberty of conscience, that the public square should be neutral, right? Now, all of us can bring our ideas and all of us can have other people try to persuade each other for the Christian values. That's what I want to do. But the moment you start enforcing blue laws and blasphemy laws, we're going down a path that the nation would not recover from. Go ahead, your thoughts.
Yeah, and the other thing is, listen, I actually agree that kids in school should learn about the 10 Commandments and should have Bible instruction. But there's a way to do that. And by the way, it's a plan that conservatives, successful conservatives, some of them have been run out of office by current forces, but like Doug Ducey, when he was the governor of Arizona, right? What did he push? He didn't push for violating the conscience rights of non-Christian parents or whatever. He pushed for increasing school choice for parents, right? So rather than funding money into a public school system that has this value neutral thing, they were going to send money to follow students. So the parents could decide then, do I want to take this money to some kind of public charter school where there'll be secular values? Or the parent, not the state, could decide, I want to take my kid with this money that's allotted for my kid and go to this Christian school. That respects choice. Then, and as long as the money or the government's not picking and choosing, right, how the parents can spend the money, that doesn't violate anybody's religious liberty rights, and we can get better education, right? Like, it just, in every way, it would improve the education system. It would increase choice. It would make the public schools have to compete for these Christian students, and so it would make the public schools better too. And so there's always an option, and this is why I love, kind of Ronald Reagan or like Rush Limbaugh's happy warrior stuff. In a pluralistic democracy, which, by the way, the principles for came from Protestant Christianity, in this kind of pluralistic society, there's always an option to make things better while also respecting everybody's rights, right? But when you have this kind attitude. And to be honest, we see it a
And
lot.
and real quick, just to jump in here, it's lazy thinking on his behalf. This tick for tat attitude. You shove this down our throat. Now I'm going to shove this down your throat. No, let's build a framework that brings the truth that we believe are transcendental, right? That are eternal. And let's build a proper framework where that whole debauchery type attitude that we're against will not thrive, right? It would peter out itself because people see the truth. And the thing you said about vouchers, right? Where parents can decide where to send their students. It would be so great because then you can have studies as to what students do better long term. Public school debauchery or ones that learn Judeo-Christian principles. And as far as our denomination, we have the best school system, the largest Protestant school system. We don't select for students. We take the best. We don't take just the best. We take everybody that can afford the education. But even a lot of times there's money to help the impoverished join our education. And the longer they stay, our key thing is they learn how to think for themselves and not become sheep is programmed by the public school systems. I remember Luther with a powerful quote that he says, I'm paraphrasing, unless the principles of Christianity are taught in the public schools, they are going to be the gateway to hell. And we see it. Our public schools, no Christian who can afford it should have their kids in public school. Either Christian school that you respect or homeschool. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. And this is just a theoretical thing, but before we hop into the article,
I want to get to the governor and his comment.
Oh yeah, because that was not good as well in the democracy. Yeah. But here's the other thing. My mind just blanked.
All right, let me jump in here real quick with the governor, right? He said it's a democracy and basically the majority rule. Do you really want that? First of all, our Constitution is not a democracy. Our Constitution is a republic, right? There is a danger in democracy because then you can have the tyranny of the majority. Let's say Louisiana flips and now you get pro-left governor. And then he starts putting tampons in boys' bathrooms. Are you going to be happy then? Are you going to suck it up? No. Our Constitution and our state legislator and all of that should follow the notion that we should respect its representative government and we should respect the rights of the minorities and try to coexist. If we go by mob rule, that's why, people say there are no blue states, just several large cities that are blue. There you see the mob majority ruling, and look at our cities. Our cities are disaster zones. There you go.
Yeah, and I would so I agree with your point about us being a republic, but I don't actually think democracy is at odds with that. In other words, so Yuval Levin, he's one of my favorites. One thing
go ahead.
Our Constitution purposefully has at odds philosophies, right? So in other words, what we have is a republic is basically a constitutional democracy, meaning there are limits on what the democracy can do. So we use democracy, right, to elect our people, right? Certain things we can settle with democracy, but that's proscribed by the limits of the Constitution. And to what Landry was saying is that if you don't like what the majority does, screw you. No, that is antithetical to constitutional.
Yes, and that's the part I was addressing, right? The part where the democracy leads to tyranny, right? And that's basically the road he was addressing, and kind of the road he was headed down, which we wouldn't want, because let's say you get, a majority that's against your values. Do you want them forcing you? No, nobody wants that.
And of that quote that you always love to quote from Ben Franklin, right? When a religion is good, I'm going to butcher it, but something to the effect of, when a religion's good, it'll support itself. And if it's bad and God doesn't see fit to support it and it calls for the state, it's a bad one.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing. And now back to Knowles. I'm disappointed in Knowles because it's a lazy way to think. It's almost like he was captivated by the fact that it was a snarky response. and that it was a raw moment of, yeah, he put them in their place. But did you really think it through? Because as a Roman Catholic himself, there was, if he wants to go back when there was blasphemy laws and blue laws and all that, if you want to go back, at that time in America, Catholics were hated and shunned. Do you really want to go back to that, Knowles, as well? The fact is that even though we are a Protestant and we are Seventh-day Adventists, we've protected the rights of Catholics. As a matter of fact, just this past year, I think our religious liberty lawyers protected a Catholic for his right to worship and to get Sunday off from work. So you don't want the majority in instances like this ruling here in America, because we have to protect everybody. If we don't protect the rights of others, who's going to be there to protect our rights? So him appealing back to yesteryear when Kennedy, right? President Kennedy had to basically make it clear to the world that his Catholicism wasn't going to run his government because Protestants were afraid of Catholics. Be careful what you wish for, right? If you don't think it through. And what we advocate here in the Gio and Joey show is think it through from cause to effect and have it be based on sound principles that govern with the Constitution and obviously ultimately respect the authority of God. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this will bridge into the last part of our conversation. But one thing that what we're seeing is there's this desire, and it's not just Catholics, by the way. I don't think he's a Catholic. But there's this desire by certain conservative Catholics and conservative evangelicals to adopt a more, I don't know if militant is the word, because like listen, we both believe Christians should be active within the constitutional system. But there's this kind of desire from certain wings of conservative Christians to adopt a more we win, you lose type of politics. I don't think it's moral. I don't necessarily think it's going to work out the way the proponents want it to, but also I think it totally misses the beauty of what American religion has added to our democracy, right? Because in America, because we had this separation of church and state, what have we've seen? We've actually seen that our various religious traditions in America have made each other better. And I include my Catholic friends in that. So, for instance, in the 70s, Protestant evangelicals, including our denomination, were not great on some moral issues like abortion, or now I would say the majority of those Christians were, but their leaders weren't. The Catholic Church was very good on that. And because we live in a country where we can dialogue between each other without fear of one faction taking power from the other, we could dialogue and we could make ourselves better, right? I think of the Acton Institute here in Grand Rapids, which is run by conservative Catholics, but it's been about promoting this idea of liberty, right? And a free economy and free religion, right? That's good, right? Some of the post-Vatican II reforms that have made the Catholic Church officially recognize religious freedom and human dignity, these things are good. And I think America's voice on the world stage has provided that forum for everyone to embrace religious liberty and the goods that come with it. I think of one of my favorite philosophers is Robbie George. He's a Catholic. He's an ethicist from Princeton University. He's great. His explanation of the natural law and stuff. And in free America with a free church, right, we've actually been able to do a lot of good. And I think throwing that away for this kind of reactionary politics, I think could do real harm to our Christian witness, besides the fact of the people that could be persecuted.
And now going along with, I don't know why the article is not showing properly on the screen, but nevertheless, this is an article Joey and I read and reviewed. And it's basically saying that there was a time in this country where Christianity wanted to instill its values in society and wanted, basically, the way I took the article is they wanted to do it by persuasion, to show the beauty of Christianity, to show how it would flourish if adopted and taken in by the people by persuasion, not by law. But lately, there's been, as you were pointing out, this undercurrent to kind of strongman Christianity into society, to shift the emphasis to political power to enforce moral order, as opposed to persuade moral order. And so that's dangerous, because I think biblically speaking, we see that's the direction the Bible says people are going to go. You read Revelation 13 and 14, and it's this notion of enforced worship under the penalty of death. Do we really want to go there? And unless we're careful, right, some people may get so fed up with the left that they swing the pendulum too far right and then start living in a world where they want to enforce blasphemy laws, enforce blue laws under penalty of civil power. And that is dangerous. Thoughts on that? We got 7 minutes remaining.
Yeah, so basically what happened is the social left has pushed the bounds of our democracy in crazy ways, right? They violated constitutional norms. No defense of that at all from me. And there was kind of a breaking point in 2015 with Obergefell forcing legal gay marriage on the entire nation against the will of the state, striking down the laws of any states that disagreed, right? This has been the definition of marriage for all of society, right? This was a terrible decision. And in the wake of that, Christians basically had to grapple with what direction do we go for the faith, right? With the faith now that had been the undercurrent of our society running in the background, with a lot of those assumptions shattered, what do we do from here? And the article kind of highlights, this is just the quick version, how it started with this conference in New York with Rod Dreher and his book, The Benedict Option. Now, I read that book, actually. It was a very good book. And in that, the early, what they're called post-liberals, and by liberal, they don't mean leftist. They mean all of liberalism, like John Locke, Free Society and stuff, the founding. But the early ones, what their thing wasn't about a militant political attack on the enemy or the left. It was about, and Roger's whole book, Benedict Option, was about we need to isolate, or not isolate, but we need to have strong Christian institutions, and our main political fight needs to be for religious liberty to live our lives separate from this mainstream attack. And I think there was a lot of good to that. And I think there were some problems too, because I do think Christians should be missional. I don't necessarily know that Rod was against that. It was just, that was the beginning of this project. But then some Catholic integralists, theologians like Adrian Vermeule and Sorba Mari, they started saying, no, this isn't good enough. We need to go back and we need to take these levers that the left uses and the left's tactics, but we need to wield them for the common good. And enter a team, Donald Trump enters the scene. Now, Donald Trump is not an integralist. I wouldn't even say he's a post-liberal, right? In other words, Donald Trump is just a guy who he wants to be president, right? But and I think this whole move was a kind of to try to graft onto him, to use him for conservative ends. But I think my core thing that I want people to take away from this is Christianity has, I believe, real power to transform culture, right? And I think if we use the means of Christianity, right, grace, mercy, right, turning the other cheek, loving your enemy, right, feeding the poor, right. There's this guy, John Dixon from Australia, and Australia's kind of ahead of America on the secularizing curve. And he's saying it's like Christians, conservatives in Australia, no, we're not going to get anywhere by just bombasting the leftists and like liberal tears and all that. It's like we have to go back to the Christian tools from the early church, right? What did the early church have? They had acts of charity, suffering with grace, like suffering with peace, and then the gospel. And like those three things, those are the weapons that Christians have to change culture. When we go for this other weapon, these other weapons of the state beyond the limits of constitutional government, we may get some short-term victories. But to paraphrase the words of old cocaine Mitch McConnell, the shoe will be on the other foot at some point.
Yeah, it's dangerous. And like I said earlier, alluding to Revelation 13 and 14, it's going in the wrong direction once you start headed in that direction. And we're going to wrap up here. But for those who haven't read the Federalist Papers, the thing that's fascinating me the most about it is that those writers understood the depravity of humanity. which is why they wrote into our government the checks and balances. And you heard the phrase, right? Absolute power corrupts. And so people get drunk on that power. And it doesn't matter if it's Christians or secular people. Once they have the power, they don't want to let go, and it degrades them. And if you want any history to that, just read Europe, the history of Europe. And when the churches had the power, whether Catholic or Protestant, and they try to enforce it, it was never pretty, and it led to that ultimate revolution of rebelling against false Christianity, which was the French Revolution. Joey, wrap us up.
Yeah, I guess if I had everybody take away one thing, it would be this. The things that conservatives in America, kind of Reaganite conservatives, have long championed: democracy, constitutional democracy, republicanism, lowercase r, right? Separation of church and state, rightfully understood, right? Where it's not about no public expression of religion, but it's about free public expression of religion, or the freedom to not express it, right? Right? Those things, those are still the best way for Christians to act within, to influence culture, right? We don't need a Protestant Franco. We don't need a strong man, right? We need suffering with peace. We need grace. We need compassion, right? And those things can make a difference in our democracy.
And I'll close out with this. What we really need, and I guess in essence to wrap this up, is a true revival of godliness, but not one forced and not one coerced. True revival, and we can save this nation. Until next time on the Gio and Joey Show, be blessed. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up, a like, subscribe, help us out. God bless, and good night.